We won't mind.
Okay, cool. I'll sit here though, so you can see everybody. Well, thanks for coming back this morning. And so for my piece, I'm just gonna do a super brief recap of kind of the main 6 recommendations, and then accompany those with 2 renderings. Ben has a lot of exciting things that I want you to focus on and spend the most time on. But just by way of reminder, is it turned on? The first was vibrancy, and introducing through either vibrancy amenities or grants, these pockets of color and interactivity into your downtown so that you receive kind of a disproportionate return on your investment. These things are, you can start many of these things next week, and for a far less investment than facades and streetscapes, get a very big impactful boost of color and activity. Again, amenities are the things that the public sector would do in the public realm. Again, it could be Main Street, it could be the chamber, it could be the city, it's entirely up to you all, but just these ideas of just creating spaces, you know, again, I'm just enamored by this image. I can sort of see your courthouse lawn turning into that kind of place. It is up to you all if you also want to introduce the notion of vibrancy grants. And you could also do these as amenities as well, but the things that would touch, you know, a private property owner's building, I think that probably needs to be in the form of a grant. And just to be very clear, I'm talking very nominal investments here. For example, if a restaurant, you know, wants to put in, you know, colorful planters, benches and stuff, I'm only thinking you have a $100 match. But it's just enough to say, hey, if you're willing to invest in bistro tables or chairs or public art, we're willing to help with that. Because again, I just think if you get the sidewalks right, it covers a whole lot of architectural and streetscapes in, and it gives you time to kind of catch up. So an easy, quick, short-term thing that you could do. Again, I'm not gonna beat this drum hard, but you know, y'all are already working on this. But just take a look at those ordinances, make sure that there aren't some inadvertent things that are preventing your desired future. Thirdly, the alleys and the art. Again, I think the alleys are a really great opportunity for you all. Again, it's sort of this, in a way, you've got this perfect storm. You know, you're working on the buildings, all right, so while that's happening, y'all focus on the alleys, connect them all. And then once the buildings are finished and the alleys are done, then you can move on to the streetscape. So in a way, it's timing out extremely, extremely well. And again, think of these places as both pathways and places. Opportunities for gathering as well as passing through to very creative opportunities throughout the downtown, and then let that spill out into the public realm. And again, I hope, you know, I'm confident with somebody like Sharon, you know, that's passionate about the arts. You know, this is a ball that won't get dropped. And again, if you need, well, what I mean is, I'm not asking you to do it all, but just somebody that's passionate and loves the arts. And again, if there's any need to defend this, we can provide you reports that just talk about the economic input of the arts in the public realm. I did, for fun and giggles, I decided to do a rendering of one potential alley in your downtown. And so, what, did I do something wrong?
No, it's great. We're like, yes.
You did. Oh,
Yeah.
no, this is the after. No, I'm just kidding. So, obviously I didn't really work much on the 2 buildings left and right because I know y'all are doing it, but if in the short term I had to do something, I would just paint them so it's not that white sort of glaring facades. And again, introducing murals, whether they're painted or the illumographic appliques, just something to treat. I'm not recommending in all of them do both walls all the time. I'm a big fan of breadcrumbs. You know, you drop one here, you drop one there, you just lure people through it. String lights make such a huge difference. And you already have a track record, but you know, just even colorful planters and, you know, anywhere that you have these sort of, you know, bump outs where people can't park or drive, to me, they're opportunities. And again, you don't necessarily have to saw cut them and introduce a bed. You can just introduce the freestanding planters, but it's just amazing how those small little insertions of color and landscaping really help. The next, of course, is the facades, and the only thing I'll say about this, since you're in motion, is just make sure, I'm confident you're working with a qualified designer, but that they adhere to, you know, these great historic preservation principles that adhere to the proper breakdown of the storefront level and the upper facade, the relationship, you know, of solids and voids, the openings of the windows, especially as you remove, definitely have to take you up on that Liza here. remove slip covers that as your budget affords, try to get back to the historic fabric and material that lies underneath. And particularly at the storefront level, it's so critical. You know, just get that right. You get the tic-tac-toe or the tripartite column and row mechanism of display window entry, display window bulkhead, display window transom, and it's gonna feel right. And again, those horizontal alignments are really, really critical. The courthouse square, again, we've already said this, since you've already formulated such a great, or perhaps it was the county formulated such a good tree plan for the square itself, you know, give equal thoughtful consideration to the outer square, or in the case of the building frontages and the sidewalks that ring it. Programming, and again, this is where Main Street excels. I guess the one thing I would say, because I don't think Ben or I said it last night, is don't think about programming as always being the major event, the big thing. Sometimes all that's required is a college student with a guitar, or a four-piece, thank you so much, quartet. You know, make sure you have lots of different scale, and that way you can introduce more frequent programming on the lawn without the rigmarole of the major festival and event. And then finally is the streetscape itself, and of course we joked about the absence of color, and there are good reasons for that temporarily, but long term, you know, it's really focused on those critical components of the streetscape, the street trees, the landscaping treatments, especially at the corners. The intersections are the key. You get the intersections right, and kind of the passage between the intersection to intersection, it's not as critical. So make sure you get the corners right. Treatments such as landscaping and public art are really essential in that. And again, introducing crosswalks that highlight those intersections more than just painting stripes. Introducing this stamped asphalt is a really good way to go. I'm glad y'all are doing it. And so here's
do it slow, so exciting.
So obviously I think everyone knows where we are here, and so I'm gonna unpack this one at a time. So let's start with the trees. So the first thing is just going from here to here. It looks like the temperature really lowered about 12 to 15 degrees. And I think the comfort, both perceived and real for the pedestrian, is accentuated and much better. The second thing is the crosswalks. Again, nothing's wrong here, but I think by introducing the color through the stamped asphalt, it's a really strong visual cue to the motorist that I need to be slow and careful here to protect the pedestrian. Now, I know Chayton is a cyclist, and given the college community, we saw tons of cyclists on campus. I'm not advocating that you are this aggressive, but if you want to be, I think it makes a really strong visual impact. It's yet again another one of those layers that's just a visual cue to the motorist. This place belongs to pedestrians and cyclists, and I need to be very careful. I also kind of think the introduction of color is a really helpful visual cue that narrows the lane width, which is the single best way to slow or calm traffic, is narrowing lane width, your lane width. Chayton made a really great observation. We were doing a tour, and we were in one part of town that you've introduced bike lanes, but yet the travel lanes still remain really wide. You could have given the bike lane another foot or two, and that's gonna have the side benefit of slowing your traffic down. All right, now look at the impact of introducing landscaping. You know, going from all this concrete to these insertions at the corner. And again, I'm not saying they have to be beds. I'm not saying you have to cover, you can do it with planters, but just the visual appeal to landscaping, especially colorful landscaping, it's shocking. And then once we start layering public art at some of the key corners, you know, it just introduces that sense of whimsy. I apologize for giving away some of Ben's thunder, but he'll unpack his bannering system in just a second. Yeah, so that there's kind of that. And my hope for you is, I should have mentioned one thing about the trees. What I've sort of alluded to on the outer square is a tree at each corner and one at the mid-block. And the reason I wanted to give you this rendering is I know you're gonna get pushback. You're gonna have people say, hey, we're losing another parking space, or maybe two, but probably just one. And if you multiply that by the width of the block, you're losing 3 to 4, depending on what you do on the cinema side. My hope is, but when you rather have that, you know, isn't that worth 3 parking spaces? Especially since you have 1,100 and you know, whatever. So my hope is this will help you if you need to sell this vision.
Well, the plan is just to put them in the sidewalk. Like the existing width that we have. And more than just one in the middle.
Oh, good, even better.
There's that.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to limit us to just.
And
Perfect.
I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. Greenville has done an amazing job with downtown revitalization. They're kind of a national model for a small to medium-sized city. They went through and they planted a bunch of water oaks, and one of the things that they didn't realize or didn't really think about was, I think they said a water oak typically is gonna have an 80 to 85 year lifespan or so, and they planted them in the late 70s. They planted them all at the same time. And then all of a sudden, what they realized about 10 years ago was, well, we planted them all at the same time, so that means they're gonna die at the same time.
Right.
So they actually went in and selectively removed perfectly healthy trees so that they could start to stagger that life. And you can imagine that that was not seen as popular
Right.
to take out a perfectly good tree. But, you know, I think one of the things that was interesting to me was seeing the ashes being removed off the courthouse lawn. You know, this idea of the lights in trees would actually be a really simple way to kind of, you know, minimize some of that negativity of tree removal. And, you know, it doesn't really matter how unhealthy the tree is. I mean, we had a 65-foot sweet gum in our backyard. If you've ever had a sweet gum, nobody wants a sweet gum in their yard.
Worst street tree.
Worst tree in existence. And it was infested with European hornets, and it was 3/4 rotten, you know? But the neighborhood was like, why did you cut down the tree? Well, because it was gonna kill all of my children. Like, it was like literally a death trap waiting to happen. But, you know, you can't kill a tree or you're a horrible person. So, being able to find those ways to minimize it, I think that's pretty.
Well, and variety in trees, you know, I've seen cities too, that, you know, they planted one tree through the entire town. And if that happened to be a tree that then becomes susceptible to some sort of virus, you want that diversity in your tree canopy also. I went to school on the other side of the state, Northwest Missouri State. It's the state arboretum, because the gentleman who started the university loved trees, and there are over 100 different varieties of trees on that campus, and so there's great diversity. So you want that in your city too, you know, in different areas, different places, and you want that variety, so you don't run into that issue either about lifespan too.
Lots of ginkgos and Bradford pears.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cleveland pear, did not plant a Bradford pear, Cleveland pear.
So to segue into benchmark, again, I can't underestimate enough the importance of just branding your efforts. You've got a new organization, brand it. You've got a new initiative, brand it. And then every time something happens in the public realm, make sure you attribute it back to that vision, that plan, so that you kind of get what Ben called brand equity. He and I work together enough that one of my favorite analogies he's used about brand equity is a brand is a promise. You know, you come to our event, if you come to our downtown, you're going to experience X. And to the degree you deliver on X, you build brand equity, and to the degree you don't, you lose it. And so I think this is an easy way for you to start building brand equity through promising to fix up your facades, you deliver. We're gonna fix up the square, we're gonna deliver. So.
Sweet. So from this, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. I might have poked fun at the star on the map. You know, I think everybody seemed to really understand though where we were coming from there, where it's like being able to have the confidence to tell your story and craft your story, and also understand that in the world of branding, the responsibility is on you to create a connected message that relates. It's not about, oh, all we have to do is create a logo and then that logo is gonna tell our community story. That's not the way it works. Communities are just too complex. Excuse me, community definitely deserves credit for, I mean, you're at least consistent, right? You know, everything looks pretty similar. And then with our Main Street, again, very, very typical response to a Main Street logo. You know, you kind of go through, it's funny, I kind of joke with communities a lot of times, because when we start on a branding process and we start talking about taglines and that kind of stuff, I was like, mark my words, someone is going to say, preserving the past, embracing the future. huge. And it's like, I get it, I understand the message, but what that really is that's an indication of like the first line of creativity. You gotta go a little bit farther. It's kind of the same thing with Main Street logos. Main Street logos are kind of like West Side Story. You're either the Sharks or the Jets. You're either a street sign or a streetscape image. And when the streetscape image is not your actual streetscape, it's also one of those things that kind of factors into it. But what I did want to do is, I'm a big believer in being thoughtful in your composition, okay? The Main Street Kirksville logo is an organizational logo. Right now, if you look at the logo composition, 65% of its readable height is the graphic. About 10% of the readable height is Main Street. Main Street is the thing that makes you different in the community. And then 25% of the composition height is the community's name. Well, if you're looking, why is Kirksville bigger than Main Street? It makes sense if this is intended to market to the outside world. But if the purpose of the organizational logo is to communicate in a smaller, closer in range, then Main Street probably needs to be the dominant identity over Kirksville, because why would I volunteer for, Main Street Ottumwa if I live in Kirksville? So, understanding that difference, and again, this is exactly what I would expect to see, but we wanna take this and move it forward to the next step. So, we talked about that branding toolbox yesterday. I always like to start with colors. Now, you all, you were strategic. You selected colors that matched up with the colors that the state was using. So it's kind of like big points for having a strategy and trying to connect to something else. I do want to warn you about something though, and I'm making a recommendation to slightly change from the colors you landed on. I applaud you for wanting to echo what's coming out of the state. But you also have to be real mindful of the institutions that exist in your community, especially with your colleges that are expert marketers and branders. There are virtually no entities that do it better than institutions of higher education, because they're constantly trying to sell people to truly invest their lives into an institution. So when you put purple alongside the previous palette, it starts to feel too rainbowy, if that makes sense. I wanted to slightly shift those colors so that I knew that your local institutional colors right alongside them would still create a vibrant but compact color palette, so that you didn't fall out to an all-out Roy G. Biv rainbow. The moment that you hit there, you trigger what I call the kindergarten factor. When you have this true rainbow color palette, it actually removes professionalism. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So there's a strategy behind the palette. You were in the right realm. You wanted to connect with something, and you knew that you wanted to use colors to help tell that 4-point approach. What I actually did, and I will say these look a lot brighter than they actually are, but I selected 4 main colors and then have a bright and dark of each one. And then I've got kind of a warm gray as our modifier. Then from there, looking at typefaces, I landed on 2 different typefaces, a primary and a secondary. The primary is kind of an interesting thick serif typeface that you have to pick something that Kirksville looks good at. Like that's your overall goal with your primary. You want it to look custom. And then you want that word type to be your organizational connector, so that your organizations feel comfortable adopting the same word type, knowing that they can have their own graphics and differences as they go through. And then that secondary is a very contemporary sans serif. These are designed to be content neutral. And I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, our community's beautiful, so we need to use a script. Or our community's old, so we need to use papyrus. Believe it or not, selecting this sans serif typeface allows you to invest meaning and personality into it, and that sans serif allows you to be contemporary when you need to be.
For fun, and we use Comic Sans.
Exactly, exactly. We were just talking about how Randy actually, as in his travels through Indiana, passed a community that used Comic Sans on their water tower.
Oh, no.
Sign of the above.
Oh, no.
So you got your colors, You've got your typeface. What this starts to look like, it's a very attractive, representation of your name, in my opinion. I think one of the things that was a challenge, you do have a lot of letters. Anytime you break over 8 letters, you start to get some real horizontal length on your name. I wanted to find something that was bold while still not being super, super wide. So I really liked how that kind of came together. So again, we've only been here for 2 days, so we're not expecting to completely change the world. I made fun of the star on the map, but from a tourism standpoint, I kind of understand a little bit about the origin of Missouri's North Star. That's a perfectly fine thing to say, but if you're gonna say it, be able to own the graphic around the message. So using the typeface, using the colors, you might be able to adopt something that's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more contemporary, that kind of serves a little bit more as an icon. But then, when you go through and you look at that and you break that component down, that can lead us into a sub-brand for the downtown, where we now have this stylized, vibrant, multicolor K. You've experimented with that in the past, but it was a very traditional approach to that, where this is a more contemporary approach. You can see I even created a kind of subset just for the square, where you've got this design square icon using the same colors and the same approach. Introducing patterns, you guys got this, you were doing this on the brochure where you had your colors that you were using and then repeating them. Well, this is doing the same thing, but now it's giving you a pattern, kind of textural pattern that you can then use. Now, this is the busiest version of it, but I've also created the single color version of it that we'll see more of. So this kind of starts to lay that framework for community-wide and a variation for downtown as it is. But then when we start to look at the organization itself, this is one of those things where we've got this 4-point approach, we're focused in on downtown, we're people helping one another. So you might consider as you go just having more of an organizational type icon. The job of the Main Street logo is not to sell customers to shop downtown. I think that's one of the biggest misnomers of what its task is. So being able to use it to connect the dots, being able to use it to talk about this 4-point approach, as you have a couple of those committees that emerge, this is the kind of thing that will start to rise up to the top. You can start to use that simple icon as a representation of your voice. And so it's a simple way to kind of make a connection but have a completely different graphic. Why is it completely different? Well, if Main Street ticks somebody off, we want them to still feel comfortable using the downtown logo. You know what we mean? Like creating just enough of a buffer that you are protecting adoption of the destination brand from organizational minutia. Then from there, we know about Kirk. So you can even go through and you can roll in some of those fun things. I mean, when you truly have a bird mascot suit, then, why not have that roll into the brand system? But again, you're seeing the exact same design approach. You're seeing the same kind of simplicity of composition. So now all of a sudden, from a graphic standpoint, you've taken this mascot that's gonna show up at events and you've rolled them into that storytelling.
Looks kind of like a blue jay. We might take the top off.
Yeah, we can change this top and it doesn't have the white stripes. It's actually, it's probably actually more like a mutated cardinal.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, we can work on that. You get where we're coming from, right? So then where it gets fun though, is once we've looked at this foundation of the components, and then we've looked at how it works in the destination and how it works in the organization, finding the way that it extends out into the events and programs that you put on, that's where it starts to really grow legs. So I tried to just take a swipe at some of the things that I saw and heard us talk about. Christmas on the Square, again, you can see where you can take those colors. Believe it or not, you can do a Christmas logo that's not just red and green. So, being able to take that vibrancy and apply it out into it. And you start to see those little elements now become very easy to latch onto, and your brand extension becomes pretty quick to cook with gas. living windows, you know, being able to kind of wrap your arms around those elements that you're doing. This creates a great segue to the Dead Windows logo that we can do. We heard Randy talk about vibrancy, you know, introducing this program around having a vibrant downtown and combining both the city invested amenities and vibrancy grants into this idea of Vibrant Kirksville. The cool thing about Vibrant Kirksville is this can also be an identity that community cleanups can live under, that, you know, volunteers can actually kind of exist under this world of making Kirksville vibrant. So
Ben, is this what you would say is branding all the downtown physical initiatives? Or
No,
is it just
no.
related to vibrancy?
This is just related to
Okay.
vibrancy, because I'm also suggesting that what we call fresh face. And fresh face really is the process of the TIF invested enhancements in the square.
Okay.
And fresh face is both a way for you to talk about the construction and investment that's going on, and could also be that, and I'm not sure whether you've thought this far on it, every single facade that you complete, you need to have a tiny party. You need to have like a little single facade festival, you know, where you just, whether it's that student out there playing and people eating or whatever, like turn fresh face into a series of sequential celebrations where you reintroduce the community to this new place that's changing in front of their eyes. So again, you can start to see with that simplicity of design approach, it makes the expansion really, really easy to accommodate. This we're pretty stoked about, right? The Whiskey and Turkey Festival. You know, you can award an honorary gobble goblet. That you can do all kinds of stuff with this. I love this origin story of, you know, a man who took in the surveyors, offered them up turkey and whiskey, and got the community named after him. You know, it's a great founding story, but it leads into a really great event. And take it and run with it, decide what makes the most sense on format, but I think that there's a lot of room to kind of take that idea. It is something that you can truly own, that nobody else will touch that. You know, it's something that when we're talking about a signature event, you will own that. So that's kind of a cool opportunity. Then talk a little bit about signage. You have wayfinding signage in the community already. It's starting to show its age. Typically, we say that those sign panels have about a 10-year lifespan. We think that your panels are probably 12 to 13 years old. So, you know, it might be time to start thinking about, as you're going through the streetscaping, enhancing some of those. In the time since you did this, the federal government has adopted a whole new standard of what those signs look like. And it was a 2009 within 2011 revision of the MUTCD, which is a stunning document. Absolutely engaging to read. But one of the things that we found is they're a lot simpler now. Signs are intended to communicate to different kinds of travelers, and we've stepped away from overly ornate branding integrated into them. So this is just kind of showing some ways that you might be able to think about from a scale standpoint and from a simplicity standpoint, ways that you might be able to integrate into a wayfinding system.
Can I weigh in on this?
Absolutely. We've got a couple different things. We've got the monument style entryways. Now, what a lot of communities do is they announce arrival at their city limits and then don't say anything else. And if you've ever noticed, the outskirts right before you hit your city limits aren't always your best and brightest. So it's okay to re-announce arrival. So on the far left, you see kind of a pole-mounted gateway as you enter into districts or you enter into special places. You can do reinforce those announcements, the announcements. Then we have two different sides, what are called trailblazer signs. Trailblazer signs kind of are those breadcrumbs that lead you in. So you can see they have this kind of clean standard. Typically the Trailblazer has no more than 3 destinations on it. That is a vehicular standard. Once you transition into an even smaller pedestrian trailblazer, you can put as many destinations on that as you want. That's the kind of thing where we can imagine what those might look like around our square, where we're pointing people to explore the different nodes. That you can list as many as you want on those, but it's when it is intended to communicate to somebody in a car, you keep that simple. You can always fall back on international standards, things like parking and library. You know, you can hit those symbols, hospitals. So that's kind of a clean way that would fit into the MUTC.
Yeah, the one compliment I want to pay Ben is, I think so often when we think about signage in the public realm, environmental graphics, we think of color and white and we never think of black. And yet black, because there's so much color in the environment, when it's introduced, it actually stands out even more. And given the fact that you have such a colorful brand system, the contrast shows even more against black. So I think it's a really good strategic move.
Well, and the inspiration behind the black was the investment the community has already made in some of the kiosks that appear throughout, especially on the square, where you already have black metal, you already have arched all cap Kirksville. So you can kind of see like there's an homage back to investment that has already been made. It's not about completely turn your back on everything you have. It's about, hey, how can we be smartest about what exists and what we want to invest in? So then we heard Randy kind of show this a little before. I'm a big believer in simplicity and order when it comes to the banner systems. A lot of times we design a banner off of a clean white computer screen, and then when we put it in the place, it becomes more clutter than it does any kind of organizational system. Now, these are not going to win any awards for design. They're super simple, but I want to talk to you a little bit about why. You know, we want to use these colors to help people understand the place. We know that right now, you don't have a lot of trees. Well, guess what? When you plant those trees, it's still going to take a while for them to grow. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to create rhythm and color and continuity immediately. It allows you to lower the ceiling. It allows people to focus on that streetscape space, on the land, you know, of the storefront. And you can simply pick sides, you can pick streets, you can use solid color. I think natural instinct when I show this is people automatically assume, well, I'm gonna do blue on this one and then red on the next one. You know, it's like, no, that's busy. How do we use this to introduce order? So, you know, that's just kind of a quick map of what you might consider. You could imagine when you have entry sequences into your downtown, like right now when you're traveling in, you've got those purple Truman banners. Well, what I'd love to see is at the point where the Truman banners stop, you introduce a 4-banner sequence of the 4 colors. And it's kind of like boom, 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 you're now in a special place. And then you carry into your entry corridor from your different directions. So think strategically about it. Introduce a dual banner system so these solid color banners can live some life while having interchangeable banners on the opposite side. That's a really good way to kind of handle some of those dynamics. Of all of the sides of the square, the west side needs the biggest banners and currently has the smallest banners. So, you know, again, think about these should be a strategic investment. They shouldn't be just to be pretty. Does that make sense?
And while you're on that point, the sidewalk on the west side that bounds the cinemas parking lot, do you all own that?
Yeah, we own the whole kit and caboodle.
I'll do some brainstorming. I failed to do that in these 2 days. Perhaps some screening mechanisms there's no way you're gonna replicate a storefront, but you obviously just lose the whole dynamic of the street wall building by virtue of that big parking lot. But there may be some things we can do. I mean, we can obviously do it with columnar trees. Maybe it's a public art installation, could be a different kind of fencing, but anything you can do to kind of create a stronger edge would be a good thing. And I'll do some thinking about that. I'm sorry I failed to do that.
And, you know, someday in the future, years from now,
Might not be parking lot.
that will be,
Right.
That's my possibility.
right, so,
One of the things that we might integrate.
I come back, I'll just buy the whole block.
One of the things that we might bring in just to, as an example and just show is, Randy and I have dealt a lot with what we call micro retail. And this idea of being able to introduce small retail bays that are the depth of a single parking space. And could potentially be interesting where as demand, shifts, I mean, you don't wanna explore this too much if you've got a ton of vacancy. But if you get to an occupancy rate where you're pretty solid, and it's like, what is the best way for us to get more retail density? You might be able to look at reclaiming a couple of those spaces and introducing some new business. So we can incorporate that in. And then final section, kind of talking about some of the marketing tactics, finding anywhere and everywhere to integrate the message. So whether you're going through and you're printing shopping bags and making these available, Shop Small Saturday has done an amazing job thinking through like how to get it branded and how to get it connected to the retailer. So whether, they do bags, they do welcome mats, they do all this kind of stuff. Think out of the box and be able to find ways that you can put that logo out there.
Nice.
I love a good hat, so, anywhere that you can put that logo, put that brand, let's do away with the car wash shirt, let's introduce kind of thing, the stuff that people wanna wear. And, one of the big ideas that I always like to throw out too is this concept of brand co-oping. And what brand co-oping is typically when we make a custom branded product, the first thing we do is go out and try to find the cheapest shirt we can find. It's like we almost operate under the mindset that the customer is unwilling to pay a premium. What brand co-oping is brand co-oping is taking a premium brand that people already know and have value for and attaching your brand to it. So as you think through all the different things that you want to do and you want to be known for, I always give the example of the Swell water bottle. I've got a 16-year-old who she came up and she was like, I want a Swell water bottle. It was like she was asking me to buy her a car. I was like, I don't understand. Well, it's a $45 water bottle. It apparently has fairies trapped in it. And it's like, I then start to understand there's a trend. Now the trend is hydro flask. So if you're gonna have, you get a hydro flask and then put your brand on it, you're associating being on trend with your community, and that value and brand equity transfers. And, if you're trying to position yourself as an outdoor recreation center, then Patagonia is a brand that transfers. So, you don't have to make thousands of these, but believe it or not, having 10 of these on people that are really outdoorsy, who wear them everywhere, starts to make an impact. People start to associate the quality of one with the other. So just think that through and be really strategic about that. You don't always have to get the cheapest possible product.
Yeah, to say almost invariably, you'll see something, you'll like their brand or their logo, but I wouldn't think of wearing what the logo is on.
Exactly.
It's crap.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It's
Well, the
true, I
newer,
think it is.
softer t-shirts,
Right.
everybody wants those now
Huge.
instead of the cheapest t-shirt available.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. It's kind of funny, I just, my boys are in a scout troop and, they just asked me to go through a process of designing a scout t-shirt, which I can tell you, if you think that community branding is hard, getting 12 boys to agree on a shirt design is a mind-boggling task. And it was, the conversation that we had was really interesting, where we were talking about what kind of shirt should we put it on? And I was like, well, there are a lot of new shirts they're really comfortable, they're tag-free, blah, blah, blah. And then finally a mom was like, have you met them? You need to get the ones that are all polyester that a knife won't go through. And I'm like, okay, I got you, you're right. So knowing the audience and putting it on something that people want to have. And then finally, starting to look at ad layout and messaging and just showing where the textures, the patterns, the color can start to come together to create this composition. Highlighting, the imagery. I mean, literally, we got this on Monday when we were walking around. Yeah, that's a killer place. That's like, I want to go see that place. So being able to provide some of that framework to help people tell the story of Kirksville.
Once the new art center is built too, we're going to update that.
Right.
Those
Sweet.
map, those inserts, they're just
Yeah.
inserts. So.
Yeah, that's awesome, that's awesome. So, and that message, if you haven't been here lately, you haven't been here, that is, that needs to be your mantra. With all of the investment that's getting ready to take place here, with all the visual change, I know that TIF is kind of leading the process and funding the process of the facade renovations, but hopefully it doesn't irritate anyone for me to say, this is the perfect time for you to use that progress to drive support and involvement in the Main Street, because you're gonna be able to show a visual difference. People are going to see the change taking place. And we all know how that goes. It's gonna go one of two ways depending on how we control the narrative. It's either gonna be, look at all the money that the government's wasting, or can you believe how amazing our home looks? Can you believe how exciting it is, what's going on in our community?
And there's a way for you to capture, we've talked a lot about connecting the dots as things are being done, and especially after the little miniature parties. You can also foreshadow it as well. I hope right now you're taking before shots so that the after shots are just mind-boggling. But I would suggest, once the architect, when he gets a nice rendering of each building, what it's gonna be, I'd go ahead and create an 8.5 by 11 template and a decal that both has your fresh face logo on it and what it's intended to be. Go ahead and put that in the window. And so people, oh wow, so this is gonna become this in the future, or coming soon to a facade near you. Build momentum even ahead of time.
Yeah, and I don't know about you all, but there's a pretty easy way where you can put two photos on a digital slider. And I will sit there for an hour sliding that thing back and forth to see before and after. I think it triggers back to the day, I remember when I went to Rome and I bought one of these souvenir books in the forum where it had the acetate sheet where you could put it over and see what it used to look like. And I mean, people are fascinated by the idea of change. And, I think we in communities become convinced that citizens are scared of change. They're not actually scared of change. What they're scared of is the place that they feel like they know most intimately being completely different and alienating them right under their watch. So as long as you're communicating and bringing them along, you can convert what could be fear into excitement. And that excitement is the momentum to get involved and to support. So that's what we were able to do. What are your thoughts?
I love it.
Oh, that is just amazing. I mean, I know you,